Hey, good afternoon, world. It's Patrick Lovell coming at you April 7th, 2022. It looks about 12:53 p.m. my time. And just outstanding news just occurred. It looks like the Senate paved the way for a confirmation for the first African American female Supreme Court justice by the name of Ketanji Jackson Brown. And it appears that she's going to be confirmed and, hopefully have a seat at the Supreme Court and all that entails. But I'm also slightly, a little bit, I guess dejected in one specific way. And I got to set it up like this, okay? So, boy, did I have a lot of hope when Barack Obama came into office. I thought it was really fantastic that Eric Holder was the Attorney General. And I thought that, well, here are two African Americans, premised on what I would say was the most eloquent, seemingly sincere sort of foundational approach to what the American dream represents through their aspirational achievement to the highest levels of office in the land. And, the same can be said for Miss Jackson Brown. And, but the reality that I know is that, it doesn't matter literally what gender you are, what race, what religious persuasion. If you get into a systemology of corruption and you don't change that corruption, particularly if you come from a group that was targeted and ultimately destroyed by the powers that be throughout this country's very strange and precarious and confrontational and contradictory history, and you don't do the right thing, then it's all for naught. Okay? It doesn't matter, for example, that there's been great strides for women in the workplace when we see, for example, situations like at the Weinstein Company, when their head of human resources, and it all sounds cliche, I know that we can all sit around the bar and go, hey, I got a call to human resources and things like that. But, literally there was a woman who got basically moved up in the company from human resources for playing ball with Harvey Weinstein's systemic rape, quite frankly. And she was a woman working for the system, okay? So if you're, for example, DA prosecutor Alvin Bragg in Manhattan, and you've got evidence that Donald Trump is guilty of so many potential crimes, but yet you decide to bury it for reasons that might be because it is too much of a political headache, then you are not actually being the redeemer that, rising to those levels of office we would expect and proclamate and all those types of things, especially in the context of, Martin Luther King, which was a huge inspiration to me. And I'll tell you, African Americans have always been a part of my life in terms of inspiring me. I mean, my favorite football player of all time is Earl Campbell. I have huge respect for Muhammad Ali. Bob Marley is definitely one of my favorite musicians, poets, artists, inspirations, and Jimi Hendrix. I mean, the list goes on. And it's not because they're black, because they're freaking brilliant, And that goes for any other number of people, whether they're women, men, whatever their lifestyle comports to. It doesn't matter to me. All people are equal under the law, and we should all be treated equally with the dignity of law. And if we rise to the highest levels of the land, then we have to do what the law requires to seek justice and remedy for injustice. So, our entire masterpiece of work, if I do say so myself, and it's because I didn't direct it. My colleague Eric Vaughn is literally Michelangelo. I could never have directed the con. I'm a producer. I'm a diligent, diehard, muckraking journalist who digs for the truth, and then I put up on, in all of the different sort of bends that enable somebody much better and much smarter than I am and much more creative to be able to put it in a cohesive symphony that would actually sing to the people that need to hear it. And that's what we've done in our work at www.decon.tv, and which illustrates everything that undergirds what it is this sermon is all about. And, this week, for example, well, it starts, again, the premise is that Addie Polk was a representation of the targeted minorities that fell into this insane predation scheme that was nothing but a Ponzi scheme. That's the entirety of the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, where this insidious system, this diabolical hyena system, would find the most vulnerable okay? Or let's say the most illiterate as it comes to financial literacy. Doesn't matter if you're what level of common sense. Financial literacy is you need to understand the dynamics of everything that goes into any kind of contract that you're getting into. And if you don't have all that information, you could become targeted, and that's what leads to what we call predation, through what they call asymmetric information. You don't see the big picture. You don't understand all the elements. You don't understand who you are in the process. All you are is looking for something that can achieve what your objectives are right then. You want a house? You want to be in a loan, and let's say, for example, like in the old days, you would have to have 15 to 25% down. You would have to have all of the other elements that check off the boxes of your lending credibility. So, for example, you'd had to be in a job for X amount of years. You had to have X amount of savings. You had to have X amount of all of these things that go into what they call the underwriting standards that would then enable you to be able to take out a loan and you pay back based on the terms of those loans, and you would understand everything that went into it. During the financial crisis and the lead up to it, and quite frankly, it went back years because we got rid of all of those laws that made, really the common sense aspect of lending go out the window. Why? Because you don't understand the big picture. And the big picture is this giant casino of predation that literally targets those who are the most vulnerable, those who are the most financially illiterate. They give them what seemingly seems to be what they want. They basically dangle the bait out in front of them. People take it, they got it, they didn't understand the terms, and then they get put into this giant pipeline of fraud that become weapons of mass destruction that blew up investors, most notably pensioners, which constitute a lot of the white working class, for example. Okay? So at the end of all of this, what you get is just a giant scheme of deception, which literally is baked into the whole premise, right? You have deceptive acts and practices on the low levels to get people into loans that they couldn't afford. And this could be, quite frankly, student loans. This could be car loans. This could be any other number of loans that you might take out, really to replace income, if you want to know the truth. And then the upside of it is what in the investment aspect of it, it's called illegal reps and warranties. So securitizers or investment banks and everybody that sell, these financial instruments that are baked in with these weapons of mass destruction, they have to have in their prospectus all of the details of what constitutes what you're investing in. Otherwise, they're on the hook. And we used to have it such that if they blew up under these fraudulent circumstances, then the people that sold them were on the hook as well. Okay, so instead, the whole world blows up, and we have Barack Obama, Mr. Change We Can Believe In, who actually previously in his career wrote anti-predatory legislation that became kind of the standard bearer, but then he seemed to forget about all of that when he became president because, of course, he replaced Wall Street's favorite candidate out of the Democratic Party when he replaced Hillary Clinton. And he came out of Chicago, which is where Jamie Dimon was, who was the CEO of Chase and, other major players in the financial industry, not to mention, of course, we get, really neoliberalism out of the University of Chicago. Okay, so there's a great deal of stuff wrapped in the city of Chicago, even though I love Chicago, city of broad shoulders. But that doesn't negate, where the financial power is, okay? So, sticking with the theme, if you come into the Supreme Court, and for example, the Supreme Court last summer, literally, basically did not do an investigation, didn't look into the details of what constituted Goldman Sachs, one of the largest financial operations in the history of the world, and a lawsuit against them by way of the Arkansas Teachers Pension Union and the Pipe Fitters and Plumbers of America Union. Okay, literally just working class people that got set up and burned on pensions that they stated Goldman Sachs knew what they were doing, meaning intent, that they were loading up these securities with stuff that basically didn't meet the reps and warranties that ultimately blew them up, which was deceptive acts and practices. There's so much more legalese involved with it, and I'm not an attorney, and please don't think I am. I'm just an executive. I'm a producer. I'm an investigative journalist. I'm an muckraker. I've learned a lot, but there's a lot more to know, to be honest with you. And so the Supreme Court basically threw it out. They were like, there was no expectation that Goldman would have known that everything that they baked into their, shorts, which they did intentionally, that the Supreme Court was none the wiser of because they never looked, and they just decided to make a decision, okay? So the theme of that, quite frankly, is playing out in courts that I have access to. I know a courageous, incredibly courageous defense attorney who used to be a prosecutor, who's a bulldog for justice, who is representing women of color right now in the courts where they're literally having their houses stolen on fraudulent paperwork that these servicers and foreclosure mills and what I call the bottom feeders and their attorneys in this process have been doing for years. They can basically manifest any documentation that they want in the courts that the courts aren't going to look at if someone challenges them. So, for example, this defense attorney that I know, brings up the fraud and the details of the fraud, and he asks for evidentiary hearings that judges will not allow, based on what they call privilege, literally, and I shit you not, trade secrets. That's what the plaintiffs are arguing, okay? What's in the trade secret? And by the way, those trade secrets are exactly what Wall Street, Citigroup, and all of the biggest banks on Wall Street said to the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission and all of the following investigations that the government did at the highest levels that said it was trade secrets. Well, guess what the trade secrets are, people? Everything that we put in the con, which shows the largest criminal conspiracy in cover-up in the history of the world and how it works. A plus B plus C. All of you know about crimes, right? Imagine, we watch crime shows all the time. Imagine you're watching your favorite criminal investigation on Netflix or whatever the case it is, and you see a railroad job, and you know the rail job when you see it. So, for example, there was a murder, and suddenly, the prosecutors and the judges aren't allowing all of the evidence. So let's say you had the murder weapon, you had the fingerprints, you had the emails that said this is what they're going to do and how and why, and yet the judge is not going to allow that into the proceeding. Don't look, don't tell. Don't look, don't find is really what it comes down to. So, look, it's disgusting. It's gross. You, me, we, all of us who are not a part of this upside of the system have been played by mammoth, perversion, inversion of everything that we're supposed to be, because liberty and justice do not reign supreme, because we killed investigations, because the power is corrupt, the revolving door gets paid by the machine that actually floated trillions of dollars into the system to backstop it for the criminals who buried tens of millions, including the most vulnerable, including, for example, African American women that were targeted by the system. And I've got so much more evidence. It's insane. And so, for example, right now, in addition to knowing all of this stuff that's going on, I'm personally engaged in speaking with a guy who was just nominated for an Academy Award, as well as a giant in documentary production who is the ultimate gatekeeper, and he's my favorite documentarian of all time. And I'm loading a lot of this information on them, plus a lot of the details, and one of their crack journalist who happens to be an African American as well. And I'm feeding them all of this information because I've got to find a way through all of this incredibly Orwellian dystopian dam of obfuscation that disables your brain to understanding the truth of what I'm trying to tell you within the configuration of everything that we're talking about. And so if Ketanji Brown Jackson gets to the Supreme Court, boy, would I love her to know the name Addie Polk. And let me tell you why that might not happen. Okay, so for example, this week, somebody that I've been dealing with for a long time, who happens to be one of my heroes, she just happens to be African American as well. I happened to put her into contact with legal counsel that was someone that, I thought was going to run to the races and bring kind of all of this to bear, right? Because she understands it and so forth. But you know what? As far as I know, she's part of the Harvard Club, okay? And she might not want to tell the story of systemic predation. That destroyed millions of African Americans. In fact, she attacked me for being a white guy who has no right to be able to tell the story that just happened to be one piece of the many stories that we told in the con. And this is kind of how this all plays out. Because in our society, everybody is vicious to try to angulate something that tells their little piece of it, and it's like mine, 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 mine. I'm going to do it my way and this and that. And meanwhile, nobody's getting the big picture. And I'm just a dude that wants everybody to understand the truth, because I was like millions. I was a victim of this stuff, and it destroyed my life, and I just happen to be a producer, and I happen to be an investigator, and I've got also just a natural tendency to be incredibly tenacious when it comes to trying to find the truth. And to be honest with you, it was a miracle that I pulled it off. And I didn't pull it off alone. I pulled it off with an incredible team that gave me access to real heroes in the system that just weren't having their voices heard. And we put that on display in the con. I'm talking about whistleblowers who sacrificed their careers and their existence to tell the truth because they're good people. And that goes for people within the system itself, meaning at the DOJ, the FBI, the SEC, and all of that is in the con. And the con devastated tens of millions of people who do not understand what happened to them, are struggling to survive, and they're trying to get to someplace, somehow, somewhere. in which they're basically gerbils on the gerbil wheel, and they'll never get there because they don't understand the truth. Because in that capacity, they're what I like to refer to, unfortunately, as chattel. Chattel that can be ground up and sold and ground up in, meat, I don't know, meatloaf, whatever, and sausage, and they're expendable. And I'm not expendable. I'm a guy that understands how the system works. I keep saying it's liberty and justice for all that we need to reconfigure based on the integrity of law that works for all of us. And I'm sorry I'm white, okay? And I'm telling you this, I don't know. I was just made this way. But I believe in justice. And I'm one of those guys that, for example, would have marched with Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement. I'm one of those guys that would have fought on the side of the Union Army to break slavery. I would have been one of those crusaders during the Civil Rights Movement that jumped on one of those buses, to go down to Alabama, the Freedom Riders and that sort of thing. When I was younger, obviously I'm a little bit older than that now, but I've always been ideological, I've been committed to justice my whole life. In terms, and I continue to come back to, Exodus and the resurrection. I mean, the stories in biblical, the methodology of these grand stories of what is on display right now, right? For Exodus, what was it? It was to escape the pharaohs to get to the Ten Commandments. Society has to operate within the manner of the law, otherwise you have chaos. That's the whole story. In the resurrection, of course, as far as I can tell, it's all about corruption and then being redeemed if you do the right things, right? I mean, this, what? I don't conform to one religious principle or economic principle or any other principles other than justice and common sense and everything that is what should be. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And yeah, does it get convoluted sometimes when things are a little difficult and people have got a lot of pressure on them and people make certain decisions that might be questionable that could lead to some sort of, problem downstream? That's why we have different degrees of the law, right? That's why we have prosecutors that have, if you steal something, there's, there's felony 1, 2, 3, or misdemeanors and so on and so forth. There's different degrees of the law. So what is the remedy for a criminal grift so overwhelmingly huge that it destroys the entire global economy, only to stuff the riches that came from the sacrifices of, quite frankly, the World War II generation that enabled the United States to have the global reserve currency that enables this fiat currency that can go into financial policy, which enables, all sorts of magic to happen and could happen, quite frankly, if it was used for the right purposes. But by my number, I think we're looking at roughly $50 trillion that has gone to backstop this criminality. What happens if we put $50 trillion into the productive economy? That's one of many issues that I'm trying to bring to the forefront of your attention. And, it's tough. It's what I call the righteous grind, man. I've lost everything in the process of doing this. It's been a heavy, heavy burden, but thank God I'm surrounded by people that share the same commitment to justice that I do and have helped push this out, not to mention everybody that, I worked with to get this truth to the world. And so obviously the bad guys own the system and they're trying to prevent us from being heard. And so we just fight harder. And that's really what it all comes down to. And, and I just happen to hear this, I think I'll close out with this. Yeah, it was interesting. I'm a throwback. I'm from the 80s, right? And so I was listening the other day. I was just watching a lot of stuff on Taylor Hawkins, the drummer of the Foo Fighters, who I absolutely adored. I love the Foo Fighters, one of my favorite bands in history. And I was so shocked by his sudden death, and it really, among many other things, just made me think that, life is fleeting. You never know how long you're going to be on this earth and how productive you're going to be. And I'll tell you, Taylor Hawkins was productive, monumentally productive. I mean, with that music that they churned out and the power that they orchestrated, may have led to his death eventually, right? But I happen to just be looking through all of these, kind of tributes, and there was this great musician in England who performed on the BBC, and I can't think of his name, but he performed one of my favorite songs from the 80s, which came from, let me think, Morrissey, of course, right? Morrissey. Boy, I love Morrissey back in the day. I like heavy metal. I like all sorts of music, but Morrissey was super cool. And there's a song called Light Never Goes Out, and it goes like this. If a 10-ton truck crashes into us, to die by your side will a heavenly place to die. And if a 10-ton truck kills the both of us, to die by your side, well, the pleasure would be all mine. There is a light that will never go out. There is a light that will never go out. And that's what I interpret as the light of justice. And I'm trying with everything I can to shine it into the darkness every day that I can, to hopefully reach the tens of millions of you who have to understand it. If you want to rally around us, we have to help each other to be able to purge the largest criminal grift and corruption in history that has complete control of everything. And I guess the last thing I'll say about that, thinking of a cultural reference, I watched recently wonderful documentary on Netflix, and it's called 14 Peaks, and it's about this badass Nepalese climber that did the most incredible superhuman feat with his team in the history of mountain climbing. And they did the impossible. And one of the things that came out of that whole thing, and one of the best lines that came out of it, was when Nim said, when you think you're fucked, you're only 45% fucked. Onwards and upwards.